and welcome to Cycle 2, Week 21 of Science. This week we're going to be talking about towers. And before we get started, I wanted to show you an example of the tower that we're going to be building today. As we look at this, I'd like for you to just take a moment, pause the video, and sit down and make what we call a KWL chart. Simply put, this is what do you know about towers? What do you want to know about towers? And what are we going to learn about towers? So what do you know? What do you want to know? And what are we going to learn about towers today? And don't worry, I'll come back and fill in a chart for you that I've already made, and we'll talk about towers in just a minute. Let's get to work. Okay, so do you have your KWL chart? Do you know what you want to know? All right, are you ready? Here we go. So this is just a simple chart that I made. Your answers might be really different from mine, and that is wonderful. We should celebrate those differences, friends. So what do we already know about towers? You might have said something like they're really big, they're really tall. Some of them have roofs, like in our picture. Some are squares, some are rectangles. I'm really excited to see some of your things that you already knew about towers because you guys are so smart. What do we want to know? Well, if I'm going to build a tower, how tall should I make it? That's a really valid question. How do I make my tower stable? Yeah, we need to make sure that it's not going to fall down. We also want to know, why did people build these crazy looking towers anyway? And are there different kinds of towers? Lastly, what are we going to learn? One, we're going to learn why this is important. Like, how is this relevant to you and me today? We're also going to learn how to build a sturdy tower. And we're also going to develop some new vocabulary today to better help us describe a tower build. Okay, let's talk about some new terms. All right, so let's get started with our new vocabulary. So for this week, I found a really beautiful painting by Roque Gamero called The Siege of Lisbon. And this picture actually demonstrates all three of the new words I'm going to introduce to you this week. The first word is a siege. The second word is a siege engine. And the last term we need to be familiar with is a siege tower. Now, based off this illustration that I have for you, you could probably already guess what a siege is. If you guess that a siege is a type of military maneuver, you would be correct. And what we have here is a super well fortified city up on this hill. And what do you notice all the way around it? Yeah, if you said this giant wall, that would be correct. So our job as astute military commanders, we have to somehow find a way to get into this city. And to do that, we are going to have to siege the city, and we're going to have to siege the city with a siege engine. Now, don't let that word engine fool you. In our modern day, we think of an engine as something in a car or even an airplane. But a siege engine was any tool that an army could use to get into a fortified city. That could include a catapult. It can include any sort of mechanism or instrument that someone would use to get their men or resources inside the enemy's city. But the best one, and the one we're going to be building today, is what's called a siege tower. And you can see that here. I'm going to circle it for you in red. And a siege tower is a giant tower that was used to get the men from the army into the fortified city that they were trying to attack. And you'll notice it's really wide at the bottom, really narrow at the top. There's even like this cool little plank walkway thing that they can lower down when they get up there and invade the fortress and get some men in to help win the war. And so those three things together are really what we're going to be studying, especially as we look at catapults in the next couple of weeks. So today, let's talk more about siege tower. And again, I would challenge you to look at this picture. Can you name or explain all three of those terms based off this photo? If you can, you're in good shape for what's next. So we're going to take the next few minutes and just look at some examples of siege towers. And the first 4 photos that you're looking at are pretty simple designs. Take a minute and maybe with your mom or dad or brothers and sisters, note some of the things that these 4 structures have in common and some things that you should be looking at. How do they look at the bottom versus how do they look at the top? Are they all the same shape? Do you see repeating shapes in any of them? So take a moment, pause the video, and talk about some of the qualities that you see that are the same between these 4 types of siege towers. Okay, so you've had a few minutes to talk about what are some similarities, and you probably noticed that they're all wider at the bottom and thinner at the top. If you didn't, take a minute and look at especially this side view of this illustration right here that I'm circling for you. At the bottom, it is significantly wider than at the top. And at the top of this one, it even has like a little drawbridge that can fall down, and you could go into the enemy city that way. That's pretty cool. So the reason that most of these siege towers featured here are wider at the bottom than at the top is that it reduces the center of gravity lower to the earth. So as we're building our towers, we need to think about where is most of the weight of our tower? Where is its center of gravity? If most of the weight at your tower is at the top of the tower, it's going to tip over. But if most of your weight is at the bottom of the tower, it will be able to stay upright. So as you're building, think about that design feature. Now, these examples here are all pretty simple siege towers. So let me show you some more complex ones. Here on this slide, we see some examples of some pretty advanced siege towers. The one here that I'm going to circle for you in red, you'll notice that, again, we see the pattern where it's larger at the bottom and smaller at the top. But not only does this particular siege tower have a drawbridge that it can let down from this pulley or string right here, it also has this. That is a battering ram. So battering rams, you can see one drawn in this pen and ink illustration over here that I'm circling, were used to knock down the wall, so they would just hit the wall over and over and over until it would eventually chisel away some of the stone, making a weak point so the wall would fall down. Now for Mrs. Manzi's class and Miss Willis's class, your siege tower should have a battering ram. You get to build your own. It's really cool. For Mrs. Baglio and Miss Byerly's class, it's not required. It's just extra. If you want to do it, go for it. But the battering ram in military siege warfare would be used to, again, knock away a tower. And then what would happen is if you didn't have a battering ram, or you were really slow to lower the wall like you wanted through your battering ram, what you could do is build this plank structure, which when you got close enough to the wall, you could lower it down and then send your best group of warriors out to fight and invade the city. Again, Mrs. Manzi's class and Miss Willis's class, you guys will be required to have not only a battering ram, but also a plank in your siege tower. So without further ado, let's talk about some of the requirements for our towers. So for Miss Bagley and Miss Byerly's class, what we're going to want to do is gather our supplies for this. It's relatively short. Please make sure that you use 100 drinking straws, that you don't use any more than that. You don't have to use all of them, but a max of 100 is what you are allowed to use. And your challenge, very simple, is to build the tallest siege tower. You should be able to have the structure built, not supporting it with your hand or holding it up in any way. It should be able to stand on its own. And I'm really excited to see how tall you guys' towers are going to be. Now for Miss Willis's class and Miss Manzi's class, your supplies vary slightly. You have the straws, tape, scissors, paper. We're actually going to add to this string or some sort of twine. Okay. The requirements for your tower are a little bit different. Your tower should have, as I mentioned, a drawbridge and a battering ram. Your height requirements is that your tower is at least 3.5 feet. The tower should have 3 or even 4 levels. It can't have 5. The tower has to have a gangplank or a drawbridge near its top. It can be on level 3 or 4, it does not matter. And that can be raised or lowered with a string. So that's where your string or twine is going to come in. You can even use thread at home if that's better. The tower is also going to need to have a battering ram in its lower section, which is basically going to be a bundle of straw suspended by string so that it can be pulled back and swung forward. With that being said, think about how you're going to move that battering ram. If you have 4 walls enclosing your battering ram, you're not going to be able to put it in and move it. If you cut a little hole in one of the walls and put the battering ram in, how are you going to get to go back and forth? So you need to think about some of these things before you start to build. Now, my recommendation, families, as you start to build your siege tower, plan ahead, draw your tower out, then go crazy with your straws and your tape. And I'm really excited to see what we're going to make this week. If you're interested in this and medieval warfare, there are 2 links that I found that have some really great history of the Middle Ages and siege and towers, siege warfare, and how they're used. Also, if you have a little extra free time, you can go check out in the Bible, Ezekiel chapter 4, I believe it is, has some pretty unique warfare terminology in there that actually includes the mention of siege engines of sorts. So without further ado, happy building, and I'll see you guys next week.